The sun had barely risen over the jagged mountains of Helmand province, painting the desert in shades of blood orange and burnt sienna. When Lieutenant Harris's team advanced cautiously through the sand-choked valley, their boots crunched against dry, gravel-strewn earth, each step measured, each glance calculated. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the metallic scent of anticipation, the kind of quiet that made every rustle of wind sound like the approach of death. It had been 3 days since the team had crossed the line into this hostile stretch of terrain. Intelligence reports were sketchy at best, rumors of insurgent movement, sudden ambushes, and locals who looked away when asked for help. Harris's unit had grown wary of these mountains, but orders were orders. They were Navy SEALs, trained to handle chaos, trained to survive when everything else had failed. Yet, as they moved, an uneasy feeling settled over the men. "Keep your eyes open," Harris murmured to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Daniels. "Something doesn't feel right." His voice was low, a whisper swallowed immediately by the vast desert expanse around them. There were no birds, no distant animal sounds, nothing to break the eerie stillness. Even the wind seemed hesitant, as if aware of what lay ahead. They had barely crossed the ridge when the first shots rang out, high-pitched, almost surgical in their precision. Bullets tore through sandbags, ricocheted off rock formations, and found targets before anyone could see them. Men dropped instinctively, their training kicking in, eyes scanning for origin points. Yet there was nothing. No muzzle flashes, no silhouettes, no footprints leading away. Only the aftermath. Insurgents lying dead, untouched by panic, taken down as though by an invisible hand. Harris froze. He adjusted his night vision scope, scanned the mountainside, and found nothing. "Daniels." "What the hell?" he muttered, his jaw tight. Daniels shook his head, frowning. We're pinned, sir. But no one's shooting at us. Not in any way that makes sense." The men exchanged uneasy glances. It was impossible. A sniper this precise, this far, should have been seen, or at least tracked. Yet every enemy shot taken, every insurgent eliminated, seemed to originate from nowhere, delivered with absolute surgical accuracy. One by one, the ambush that should have decimated Harris's team turned to their advantage. And yet, no one could explain how. A single bullet whistled past Harris's ear, embedding itself in a rock barely inches away. His heart raced. The men ducked behind cover, glancing frantically at one another. Then they saw it. A lone bullet casing, cleanly engraved with a tiny cross, lying on the desert floor where no one had been. "That's not possible," whispered Daniels. His voice trembled with disbelief. "There's no way." Harris picked up the casing, turning it over in his gloved fingers. There was something almost sacred about it, as if it carried a message. The men stared at him, waiting for an explanation he didn't have. He shook his head. "Somebody saved us," he said finally. "But I don't know who. Or how." From that day on, whispers spread across the SEAL teams operating in Helmand. Tales of a ghost sniper began to circulate. A man who appeared in the deadliest moments, eliminating threats with precision unmatched by any living soldier. He had no rank, no name, no record. He didn't operate under orders. He simply appeared when death seemed certain, leaving behind nothing but the faint echo of a gunshot and a bullet casing engraved with a cross. Some said he was a former SEAL, discharged or erased from the system for reasons no one understood. Others whispered of supernatural intervention, a guardian spirit protecting the men on the ground. Harris himself began to notice patterns. Whenever his team was pinned, when every angle seemed hopeless, an unseen hand would intervene, turning the tide. By the end of the mission, half his men were alive where only death should have awaited them. That night, Harris sat in the command tent, staring at the casing in his palm. The desert winds howled outside, rattling the canvas, whispering secrets of the mountains. He traced the tiny engraved cross with his fingertip, feeling a strange sense of reverence. "Who are you?" he muttered under his breath. "Show yourself, goddammit, so we can thank you." There was no reply. There never was. Only the endless desert stretching beyond, silent and indifferent. Back at base, the incident was logged in official reports as an unknown sniper neutralization. No name. No details. No explanation. Harris knew the truth, but he also knew no report could capture it. This man, this ghost, operated outside protocol, outside recognition, outside the reach of bureaucracy. He was an enigma, and that was his weapon. Word of the ghost spread quietly, like a secret passed from one soldier to another. He became a legend, not celebrated with medals or ceremonies, but honored in hushed tones over radios and in dimly lit mess halls. Every man who had seen the unexplainable knew he existed. He was real, and he would appear again when the cost of inaction was too high. For Harris, the mission's end was not closure, only a reminder. Somewhere in those vast, unforgiving mountains, a man moved unseen, his rifle an extension of his will, his bullets carrying the lives of countless soldiers he would never meet. The desert had a guardian now, a shadow whose presence was felt, but never fully seen. By the time dawn broke over Helmand, painting the mountains in harsh gold light, Harris had made a silent vow. Whenever he returned to combat, whenever his men faced impossible odds, he would salute the unseen sniper whose aim had saved them. He didn't know the man's name. He didn't need to. The ghost shooter's legend had begun, and it would echo across every battlefield and every whispered story for years to come. The wind carried the story across the ridges that day, and the mountains seemed to echo it back. A man without rank, without recognition. Yet every seal saluted him. A hero whose battlefield was the shadows, whose victories were never recorded, and whose presence turned hopeless despair into survival. And somewhere, across those endless deserts and rugged valleys, the ghost waited, watching, calculating, ready to step into the fray wherever chaos demanded, as silent and untraceable as death itself. The desert winds of Afghanistan had long carried the legend of the ghost shooter, but thousands of miles away, in a small sun-baked town in Arizona, the man himself lived in complete obscurity. His name, Elias Ward, meant nothing to the casual observer. He owned a modest repair shop on a dusty street, sand-colored bricks fading under decades of relentless sun. The bell above the door jingled as he greeted customers with the same quiet nod, hands always busy with a wrench or a screwdriver. He repaired things: cars, guns, lawnmowers, but never spoke about himself, never offered a story. Inside the shop, walls were lined with tools, spare parts, and carefully catalogued firearms. Each piece was meticulously cared for, polished, cleaned, and stored with the precision of a soldier who understood the value of discipline. On a shelf above the workbench sat a Barrett sniper rifle, its stock worn from years of use, its barrel meticulously oiled. Elias often glanced at it during slow hours, almost as if it were a silent companion, a reminder of a past life that had refused to leave him. The town knew him as the quiet, reliable repairman. No one suspected that this unassuming man had once walked deserts where the blood of enemies and allies alike had mingled, where a single miscalculation meant instant death. He had served, yes, but erased, removed from official rosters, denied medals, stripped of honor in the eyes of bureaucracy. And yet, those who needed him never questioned his existence. He appeared where he was needed most. It was a hot afternoon when a young Marine named Marcus Thompson walked into the shop. He was here to repair a rifle for his upcoming training rotation, But as soon as his eyes fell on the barret above the bench, something stirred in him. "That's a beautiful piece," Marcus said, cautiously respectful. "Custom work?" Elias didn't look up immediately. He ran his hand along the stock, his knuckles white. "It's old," he murmured. "Has history." "History?" Marcus pressed, leaning in closer. "You know? I've heard stories about a sniper they call the Ghost Shooter. Saved SEAL teams in Afghanistan. Some say he's the best shot alive. You've ever heard of him?" Elias's hand froze mid-motion. For the briefest fraction of a second, the decades melted away, replaced by heat, sand, and the echo of gunfire. The memories of men screaming, of bullets zipping past, of unseen bodies dropping, so many lives saved and lost flooded back. He took a slow breath, steadying himself, letting his expression smooth into calm neutrality. "Never heard of him," he said flatly. Marcus, sensing hesitation, nodded politely. "Right. Just a rumor, probably." "You don't? You haven't been there?" He gestured vaguely toward the desert beyond Arizona, but Elias's gaze remained fixed on the rifle. He remembered those nights, crouched on a ridge, staring through his scope at enemies who would never know the identity of the man who pulled the trigger. Remembered the faces of American soldiers frozen in fear, and how a single shot, a single bullet, had turned despair into survival. He remembered Lieutenant Harris, who had saluted an empty ridge in thanks for a life he didn't know had been saved by a ghost. Elias had lived his legend without ever seeing it in print, without ever needing it confirmed. "I work here," he said finally, voice low and even. "I fix things." That was enough. Marcus didn't push. Some things weren't meant to be asked aloud. Instead, he left the rifle with Elias and promised to return. As the young Marine exited into the blinding Arizona sun, Elias returned to polishing the weapon, his mind wandering back to the mountains, to the heat, to the chaos of war. At night, when the town slept under a sky smeared with stars, Elias often stepped outside, standing silently in the quiet, scanning the horizon as if he could still see miles ahead, as if the desert had never let him go. Sometimes he thought of Lieutenant Harris and the other SEALs saved by the ghost. They didn't know his name. They didn't need to. And he, Elias Ward, didn't need recognition. The quiet Arizona life was deliberate. The world had no idea of the man in their midst, a soldier whose actions were impossible to trace, whose existence had been wiped clean by the same government he had once served. Yet, even erased, he could not ignore the call when lives were on the line. The ghost shooter was not a ghost because he was dead. He was a ghost because the world had denied him existence, and that invisibility became his strength. One evening, a letter arrived at his shop. No return address. Inside was a single line typed neatly. "They are trapped. You know what to do." Elias didn't flinch. He knew exactly who they were, another team in trouble, another impossible mission that had been denied by officials. No one else could go. No one else would dare. His fingers traced the envelope, the weight of responsibility settling over him like a familiar shroud. For hours he prepared quietly, cleaning rifles, packing ammunition, checking optics. Maps were studied in silence, routes memorized. Every calculation, every decision was made with precision honed over years of off-the-books operations. His life had been erased, but not his skill, not his instinct, not the resolve to save those who could not be saved through official channels. The desert had claimed many soldiers, but Elias had learned its ways. The mountains, the sand, the wind, they were allies, instruments of strategy. And he had learned something else too. Anonymity was power. It allowed him to move unseen, strike without consequence, and disappear before anyone could react. To the soldiers in the field, The ghost was a savior. To the world, he did not exist. Elias paused by the window, staring at the setting sun, thinking of the men he had saved, thinking of the countless times his life had been invisible to history. He knew the coming mission would be like every other, dangerous, solitary, and unrecognized. But he didn't hesitate. Recognition was irrelevant. Survival, success, and saving lives, these were the only measures of his work. That night, the town slept peacefully, unaware that one of its quietest residents was about to vanish once again into the desert shadows. The ghost shooter would answer the call. He would move like a shadow across mountains and valleys, silent, unseen, lethal. And when the mission was complete, when the lives were saved, he would return to the Arizona streets as Elias Ward, the unremarkable man behind the repair shop counter, polishing rifles and pretending to be ordinary. No one would know. And that was how he liked it. Somewhere, across the globe, soldiers were sleeping because a man with no name had walked the desert for them. And that was enough. Long before Elias Ward walked unnoticed through the streets of Arizona, long before the whispers of the ghost shooter reached Lieutenant Harris's ears, he had been part of something far darker, far more secretive than any battlefield recognition could acknowledge. It had been known only to a handful of people within the Pentagon, buried under layers of classification. A project so clandestine that it was whispered about with fear. Operation Silent Echo. Elias had been recruited straight from his Navy SEAL training. A prodigy among prodigies, unmatched in marksmanship, patience, and the cold logic required to execute missions that left no trace. Silent Echo was not a unit. It was a ghost program designed to create operatives who could intervene in conflicts denied to public scrutiny. There were no rosters. There were no commendations. There were no official orders. Only the mission and the expectation that failure meant erasure, not just of the operation, but of the operative himself. Elias had excelled. He learned to disappear into deserts, cities, jungles, and mountains. He mastered sniper rifles, handguns, and improvised weapons. He memorized terrain and wind patterns, understood ballistic calculations to fractions of an inch, and could neutralize threats from distances where conventional soldiers couldn't even see his target. He was fast, precise, and silent, a perfect weapon in human form. But the cost was invisible. While other SEALs returned home to medals and recognition, Elias's records were expunged after a mission gone tragically wrong. It was meant to be a simple extraction, intercept a high value, target in a remote village, and eliminate only the immediate threat. Instead, friendly fire struck unexpectedly, killing innocents. Commanders panicked. Reports were doctored. Names were changed. Records destroyed. And the man who had saved countless lives through skill and instinct became a ghost not only to the enemy, but to his own government. Elias recalled that night vividly. The desert air had been thick with smoke and sand, voices of the dead and dying echoing through the canyon like a chorus of accusation. He had watched through the scope as his fellow soldiers survived, oblivious to the fact that every bullet he had fired had been calculated to protect them. And yet, when the dust settled, it was only his name that vanished from reports. "You're off the books now," an officer had said to him in a tent lit only by the red glow of warning lamps. "You exist only in the shadows. Don't question orders that don't exist. Don't seek recognition that won't come. You are." Silent Echo. And so he had become something more than a man. A ghost. A savior who moved without identity, without proof, whose victories could never be celebrated. Operation Silent Echo had created men like him, not for glory, but for necessity. They were the instruments governments used to enforce power in ways that could never see the light of day. They were expendable, unseen, and untouchable, except by their own skill. Elias had adapted quickly. Survival was instinct. Silence became second nature. In the field, he was untouchable. In civilian life, invisible. He knew that a single misstep could lead to termination, not by a firing squad, but by bureaucratic erasure, the kind that could dissolve him from history. He had been trained for this. And yet, the memories lingered. Faces of soldiers saved, faces of innocence lost. Every mission left scars in the soul. Every shot he fired carried the weight of life and death. It was during one of these missions, deep in a mountainous region of Afghanistan, that he first encountered the type of situation that would define his legend. A SEAL team had been ambushed while securing a forward observation post. They were pinned, outnumbered, outgunned, and out of luck. Communications were cut, support denied. It was the kind of situation where a death toll was expected, almost inevitable. But from the shadows, a single sniper appeared. Shots rang out with impossible precision. The enemy dropped. Not a single ally was harmed. And then, as suddenly as he arrived, he was gone. That sniper was Elias Ward, but no one would know it. No one would ever know it. He had left only a single bullet casing engraved with a small cross, his signature. It was subtle, untraceable, and permanent. It became a calling card of sorts, though only whispered about among those who had witnessed the impossible. Over the years, the pattern repeated. Teams trapped with no hope, insurgents in strategic positions that should have been impregnable, targets that seemed untouchable all, were neutralized with eerie precision. Each time, a single cross-marked casing remained. And each time, the legend of the ghost shooter grew among soldiers, unrecognized by the Pentagon, untold by the media, impossible to prove. Elias's own life outside the field became a careful act of concealment. He worked under a new identity in civilian life, yet every day was punctuated by the memory of war, every night haunted by calculations and trajectories, by faces and names that he would never be allowed to share. The desert, once an enemy, became a friend. Silence, once oppressive, became protection. And the ghost was born, a man with no official existence, yet whose influence spanned continents. Yet despite the precision, despite the invisibility, the weight of it all pressed down on him. Every mission was a moral puzzle, a delicate balance between saving lives and erasing existence. Friends lost, innocence lost, recognition denied. And still, he moved forward. For the soldiers on the ground, he was hope. For the government, he was liability. For himself, he was a man trying to reconcile purpose with erasure. There were nights when he sat under the stars, in the silence of a desert far from any town, staring at the sky and asking the questions no one could answer. Why him? Why did the weight of unseen intervention always fall on his shoulders? Could he ever stop? And if he did, how many lives would end because the ghost was no longer there? These were the questions he carried with him when he returned to Arizona. Even in civilian life, the discipline, the skill, the instincts of silent echo never left him. Every rifle he polished, every tool he handled, every quiet glance at the horizon was part of the training, part of the life he could never leave behind. And yet, Elias Ward had learned the most important lesson. It was not fame or recognition that mattered. It was the lives he saved. That was the measure of his success, the proof that he existed, even if no one else ever recorded it. The classified shadows of his past loomed over him like a storm, yet he had become adept at navigating them. The ghost shooter did not need validation. He needed only to act, to save, to disappear. And as whispers of his legend grew among soldiers, he allowed it to live without revealing himself. Every story told of a single shot that saved a life, every mention of an unseen sniper, every salute to a man with no name. These were victories more meaningful than any medal. In the quiet of his Arizona workshop, Elias glanced at the maps scattered across his table, noting areas where intelligence hinted at danger, where no official help could reach. He knew his next mission was approaching. Somewhere, a SEAL team would be in peril, trapped by enemy forces, denied official support. And somewhere, the ghost shooter would step back into the shadows. Because history, classified or otherwise, had no place for men like him. And yet, he existed. And when the time came, he would remind the world, at least the soldiers who counted, that a single man, unseen, could turn impossible odds into survival. The desert may have erased his official record, but it could never erase his purpose. He was silent echo incarnate, a shadow in the sand, a ghost in the mountains. And as long as soldiers were in danger, as long as missions were denied, as long as life demanded a guardian, Elias Ward would answer. He had no rank. He had no name. He had no recognition. And yet every bullet he fired, every life he saved, solidified the legend of the ghost shooter. The sun had barely breached the jagged ridges of Helmand Province when Commander Blake's SEAL team began the reconnaissance mission. The valley ahead was a labyrinth of rocky outcrops and dry riverbeds, the kind of terrain that could conceal ambushes, traps, and enemy fire in an instant. Blake had led countless operations before, but the unease in his gut told him this mission would be different. Something about this valley carried a history of blood, whispered in intelligence reports that were vague and incomplete. Eyes sharp, Blake commanded, his voice low but firm. We move as a unit. No heroics. The men nodded, advancing with silent precision, their eyes scanning every ridge and crevice. Radios were quiet, only the soft hum of tactical communication filtering through earpieces. The team's training had made them instinctively synchronized, yet even seasoned SEALs couldn't anticipate what was about to unfold. Suddenly, insurgents appeared, firing from elevated positions that should have been impossible to hold. The team was pinned instantly, bullets ricocheting off rocks, dust erupting around them. The SEALs returned fire, but there were too many targets. Communication was compromised. The valley was a cage. Death felt inevitable. Blake ducked behind a boulder, scanning the ridges. His eyes caught flashes of movement, but nothing concrete. They're everywhere, whispered Lieutenant Davis, his face grim beneath the helmet. We can't hold them. And then a single shot rang out. It came from impossibly far, precise, deliberate. A sniper's bullet tore through the chest of an insurgent before he could raise his rifle. Another followed, and another. Each enemy dropped with near-perfect timing, and yet no muzzle flash, no figure, no trace of a shooter could be seen. Blake's heart raced. Did you see that? He whispered. Where? Daniels shook his head, equally stunned. The men began scanning frantically. The insurgents faltered, confusion overtaking their attack. Then, as if choreographed by an invisible hand, the remaining enemies were eliminated one by one. Every SEAL on the ground sensed the impossible. Someone was here, and someone was saving their lives. When the chaos subsided, Blake ordered a sweep of the ridge. They found nothing. No sniper, no footprints. Only a single bullet casing, engraved with a tiny cross, gleaming faintly in the harsh sunlight. Blake held it in his palm, feeling the weight of its silent message. It's him, murmured Daniels, reverence in his voice. The ghost. A ritual began that day. Before every mission, before every insertion, Blake's team would raise their hands in salute to the ridge, to the mountains, to the unseen warrior who had saved them. They never saw him again, but his presence was felt. His actions had become part of their code, a silent oath of respect and gratitude. Word of the ghost shooter spread quietly among other SEAL teams operating in the region. Some dismissed it as myth, the kind of story soldiers told to give hope in impossible situations. But those who had survived knew better. Harris's encounter had already set the precedent, and now Blake's team reinforced the legend. Elias Ward, wherever he watched, knew of the ritual. He observed silently from hidden perches, calculating, waiting, but never interfering unless absolutely necessary. Recognition was irrelevant. Every salute, every whispered acknowledgement was enough. The men didn't know his name, didn't know his face, didn't even know if he truly existed in the official sense. But they respected him. They honored him. And that was enough. The ghost shooter's code was simple yet profound. Save lives without leaving evidence. Intervene only when necessary, and never claim credit. His identity was irrelevant. His purpose was absolute. Every SEAL who survived owed their life to him, and every survival was a testament to the discipline and precision instilled through years of classified training. During quiet nights at forward operating bases, Blake often found himself staring at the mountains, imagining the ghost perched silently, scope raised, watching over them. The ritual became a grounding point for his team, a reminder of the stakes and the unseen support that existed in the chaos of war. It was a moral compass in a world of ambiguity and danger. One evening, after a mission where they had narrowly escaped an ambush in the Sangan Valley, Blake found himself alone on the ridge, staring at the faint glimmer of a cross-marked bullet casing embedded in a rock. He ran his fingers over it, feeling the cool metal, thinking of the man who had never claimed glory. "He doesn't ask for thanks," Blake whispered to the wind, "but he deserves it." The ghost shooter became more than a savior. He became a symbol of excellence, an honor that existed outside the rigid structure of military bureaucracy. To the SEALs, he was the standard they could never fully meet but aspired to emulate. Precision, discipline, courage, and selflessness, these were the hallmarks of the ghost. And even in the absence of medals or commendations, every SEAL saluted him, because every SEAL understood what it meant to serve in the shadows. Unseen yet indispensable. Blake's team completed their mission and returned to base. Reports were filed, carefully sanitized to remove any trace of the miraculous intervention. Higher command accepted the narrative as routine combat engagement, unaware that a phantom presence had turned the tide of battle. Yet within the team, the story of the ghost shooter was etched into memory, retold in hushed tones during downtime, in mess halls, and across secure channels. The ghost's interventions were never predictable. They were not telegraphed or sought. He appeared only when necessity demanded, vanishing into the desert shadows once the danger passed. No one knew his schedule, his identity, or his history. All anyone knew was the result: survival where death should have reigned, a silent hand guiding them through the impossible. The SEAL's code, forged over decades of training and combat experience, had been tested that day, and the ghost shooter had reaffirmed it in the most extraordinary way. Courage, teamwork, discipline, and trust in each other were the principles that defined them. And now the legend reminded them of a higher standard: honor without recognition, action without applause, life saved without the world ever knowing. In the quiet moments before sleep, Blake often thought of the ghost, perched somewhere in the mountains, silently watching over his team. He imagined the precision of his rifle, the calm discipline in his movements, the patience that allowed a single bullet to change the course of life and death. And he knew that the ghost's presence was a constant reminder that heroism did not always wear a name, did not always demand recognition, and did not always exist within official channels. The desert winds whispered through the ridges as Blake and his team settled for the night, each man silently saluting the mountains. Some did so instinctively. Others followed the example set by their leader. And somewhere, in the shadows of the ridges, the ghost shooter observed, unacknowledged, unrecorded, yet profoundly impactful. It was the unspoken bond between a soldier and the unseen guardian who had chosen to protect him, a bond forged in silence, discipline, and unwavering dedication. The ghost shooter's code was complete. Act with precision, protect those in peril, leave no trace, claim no glory. And in that code, the SEALs found inspiration, respect, and a standard they would carry into every mission thereafter. As dawn broke over Helmand, the mountains glowed with the harsh light of a new day, and the SEALs, alive because of a man who did not exist in the books, prepared for the next mission. They knew the ghost would not appear again unless absolutely necessary, but they also knew that somewhere he was watching, waiting, and ready, and they would salute him, silently, every time, because that was the ghost shooter's way. Elias Ward had thought he had left the past behind. Arizona, with its sun-scorched streets and quiet repair shop, was supposed to be a sanctuary. Yet the shadows of his life refused to remain buried. Even in the relative calm of civilian life, there were echoes that could not be silenced, whispers from classified files and lost comrades that demanded attention. It began with the envelope. No return address. No signature. Only 3 words typed neatly across the paper. They are trapped. Elias's heart tightened. He didn't need to ask who they were. He knew. A SEAL team, deep in enemy territory, denied official support because the mission was politically inconvenient. The operation had been scrubbed from the books before it even began. The men on the ground had no hope of extraction. And yet, hope would arrive, just as it always had through him. But this was more than a mission. It was a test of his resolve, a confrontation with the ghosts of his own past. He remembered the night in Afghanistan when everything had fallen apart, when a friendly fire strike had killed his family, his wife, and daughter, caught in the crossfire of a secret operation gone wrong. That tragedy had been buried in classified files, erased from history, denied to the world. And he had buried himself, erasing his existence from official channels, vanishing into obscurity. Now the past demanded action. The CIA had been tracking him for months, tracing the ghost shooter's signature to his quiet life in Arizona. Agent Sarah Knox, a seasoned intelligence officer with a reputation for relentless pursuit, arrived one evening at his repair shop. She didn't enter with a warrant. She entered with questions and suspicions she had long harbored. "You're Elias Ward," she said, her tone firm but careful. "Or at least that's the name you've been using. You've been active where no one should be. I've seen report sniper activity that matches your style. Tell me, are you responsible?" Elias's hands paused mid-repair, his eyes flicking to the Barrett rifle above the bench. For a brief moment, the Arizona air seemed thick, suffocating. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, voice steady, almost rehearsed. Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I know it's you. I don't need proof. And I'm not here to arrest you. Not yet. But I need to understand why you keep appearing. These men, these SEALs, they're alive because of you. Why do you do it?" Elias didn't answer immediately. Memories of the friendly fire incident rose unbidden. The blast, the screams, the faces of his wife and daughter frozen in disbelief. That mission had been covered up, the blame shifted to a faulty intelligence report, a rogue operator. No one had been held accountable. The government had erased him, but not the pain. "I don't fight for them anymore," he said finally, voice low. "I fight for the men they forget. The ones left behind in operations they pretend never happened. The ones who will die if I don't step in. That's why I move. That's why I intervene. Not for medals, not for recognition, but for survival, for life." Sarah studied him, sensing the weight in his words. She could see the discipline, the precision, the moral code etched into every line of his face. And yet, She also saw the pain, the loss, the ghostly shadow of a man who had been denied justice, denied acknowledgement, and yet still chose to act. "You could be arrested," she said. "The government could come for you. This mission alone could get you killed or worse. Why risk it?" Elias picked up the rifle, cradling it like a living thing. "Because someone has to. Because if I don't, they die. And someone has to survive to tell the story. Not me, but the ones who live because of it." It was the first time he had spoken so openly in years. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding that there was no reasoning with a man like him. Elias Ward wasn't motivated by fear, by fame, or by orders. He was motivated by a sense of responsibility that transcended protocol, a duty forged in the fires of loss and combat, and hardened into an unbreakable resolve. The next morning before dawn, Elias prepared for the mission. His movements were methodical, rehearsed, precise. He cleaned his rifle, loaded his ammunition, studied maps, and memorized every potential approach and escape route. Every calculation was deliberate, every decision critical. The team trapped in Afghanistan depended on him. And he would not fail them, not as the ghost shooter, not as Elias Ward. Sarah Knox had insisted on accompanying him to the staging area, though she would not interfere. "I'll observe," she said. "Not report, not interfere. But I need to see this, to understand why a man like you exists outside the system." Elias didn't respond. Words were unnecessary. Action would speak for him, as it always did. The journey to the coordinates where the SEAL team was trapped was treacherous. Desert terrain stretched endlessly, punctuated by ridges, valleys, and canyon walls that could conceal ambushes. Every movement was calculated. Every shadow considered a potential threat. The ghost shooter had become a master of invisibility, trained to move undetected, leaving no trace. And yet, every step carried the weight of memory, the knowledge of loss, of lives ended by circumstance, of comrades erased from history. Hours passed. Night fell. The air grew cold, harsh against exposed skin. Elias found a vantage point overlooking the enemy encampment. Through his scope, he assessed every angle, every guard, every position. Precision was critical. Lives depended on it. One miscalculation would cost them everything. He fired. One shot. Another. Each bullet found its mark. Enemy soldiers dropped with surgical accuracy, while the trapped SEALs remained untouched, oblivious to the source of their salvation. The operation was silent, invisible, and lethal. The ghost shooter moved through the shadows, systematically eliminating threats, orchestrating survival like a conductor directing an invisible orchestra. When the mission was complete, the team was rescued, their lives intact. And then, as always, Elias vanished into the desert. No one knew who had saved them. No one could testify. Only a small cross engraved on a spent bullet remained, a signature, a whisper, proof enough for those who understood. Back in Arizona, Elias returned to his shop as if nothing had happened. The world would never know. The media would never report it. The Pentagon would never recognize it. But the lives saved would carry forward, each soldier a living testament to the man with no rank, no name, and no record. Sarah Knox watched from a distance, silent, humbled, and awed. She realized that some men didn't need approval, didn't need medals, didn't need acknowledgement. They needed only purpose, discipline, and the courage to act when no one else could. Elias Ward had all of these in abundance, and perhaps that was why he had survived, why he had become the legend known only as the ghost shooter. That night, he sat in his small Arizona home, staring at a photograph of his lost family. Pain, regret, and memory lingered, but it did not paralyze him. Instead, it fueled him, reminding him of the stakes, the cost, and the responsibility he carried. Every mission, every bullet, every life saved was a tribute to the past he could not change. The ghost shooter had no rank, no name, no recognition. And yet, he was a hero in the purest sense, a man who acted when others could not, who saved lives the world would never know, and who honored the unspoken bond between soldiers through action, not applause. For Elias Ward, the past would never stay buried. It was a shadow that walked with him, whispered in the desert winds, and guided his aim. And for the men on the ground, it meant survival. Some legends are built on fame. Others, like the ghost shooter, are built on silence, sacrifice, and unwavering resolve. And some, like Elias Ward, carry their entire lives in shadows, acting not for themselves, but for every life that might otherwise be lost. The mission was over. The SEALs had returned to base, their faces lined with exhaustion, their uniforms torn and dust-caked. They were alive, each one carrying the silent testimony of what had happened in the mountains. They would not speak of the details openly. The Pentagon had scrubbed every report, but they all knew the truth. Someone had saved them when no one else could. Someone with no rank, no name, no official existence. Commander Blake stood at the edge of the base's mess hall, staring out over the dry, dusty compound. Around him, soldiers were eating in silence, some laughing quietly, some just staring into their food, lost in thought. Blake's mind, however, was elsewhere on the ridge, on the mountains, on the man who had appeared from nowhere, controlled the battlefield, and vanished without a trace. "They don't even know his name," murmured Lieutenant Daniels beside him. "And still, he saved us." Blake nodded slowly. "He doesn't need recognition, but we owe him our lives." And so, a ritual began, a ritual that would grow, whispered among SEALs at forward bases, in training camps, and in quiet mess halls. Every time they prepared for a mission, they would salute the horizon. Not for orders, not for medals, but for the ghost shooter, the invisible guardian who had proven that sometimes the most important hero is the one the world refuses to acknowledge. It started simply. A bullet casing, cross-marked, left at a memorial. A hand raised briefly in salute when passing a ridge where a team had survived. The gestures were subtle, almost secretive, but they carried meaning. Every SEAL who had encountered the ghost shooter understood. Every life saved was a story of courage and precision, and every salute was a silent tribute to the man who did not exist on paper. Blake walked through the base, observing the subtle acts of respect. A soldier paused at the base's small chapel, fingers brushing over a photograph of fallen comrades, and left a single cross-marked casing at the edge of the altar. Another soldier adjusted his gear, saluting toward the horizon as if expecting a reply from an invisible figure. Every act was an acknowledgement of a hero who had never been recognized officially. Meanwhile, Elias Ward remained invisible, his work done quietly and without fanfare. Somewhere in the deserts beyond, he maintained his vigil, tracking intelligence, calculating trajectories, and preparing for missions that the world could never authorize. He did not know the rituals, the salutes, or the quiet tributes left in his honor, but he did not need to. The world did not matter. Only the lives he could protect mattered. For the SEALs, the salutes became more than ritual. They became a moral compass. The ghost shooter's actions embodied every principle they had been trained to uphold: discipline, precision, courage, and selflessness. They were reminded that heroism did not require fame or recognition. It required only action, commitment, and unwavering resolve. Over time, the legend grew. Stories circulated among new recruits. The ghost shooter appeared when all hope was lost, a sniper whose aim never failed, a man who moved unseen and vanished without leaving a trace. Each recounting reinforced the standard to which the SEALs aspired, a silent code that transcended training, medals, and paperwork. He was a teacher without words, a hero without a biography, and a symbol without a face. Blake's thoughts often returned to the moment on the ridge, when the firefight had ended as suddenly as it began. He could still see the cross-marked casing glinting in the sunlight, small but unmistakable, a marker of intervention, skill, and unseen courage. He had lifted his hand to salute then, instinctively, and every SEAL who had witnessed that moment followed suit. When new teams were briefed on dangerous missions, the legend was passed quietly, almost as if it were a secret code. Trust in your training, senior officers would say. And sometimes, trust in the ghost. There was no formal acknowledgement, no documentation, no medals awarded, but the respect was real. And in the hearts of those soldiers, the ghost shooter was as tangible as any general or commander they had ever served under. The ritual extended beyond the base. Soldiers returning home would sometimes pause at memorials, leaving a small token of cross-marked casing, a silent nod, a whispered prayer for the man who had saved their lives. The ghost shooter had become a symbol, a constant presence in the lives of men whose existence depended on courage and discipline. Even without recognition, his influence shaped a generation of warriors. Blake often reflected on the paradox. The world could not know him, could not record him, could not celebrate him, but every SEAL who had survived understood. And that understanding was powerful, grounding, and eternal. They saluted because it was right, not because it was demanded. They honored him in silence because silence was his realm, the only language in which he had ever operated. In one quiet moment, Blake found a single cross-marked casing atop a stone engraved with the names of fallen comrades. He knelt, brushing the dust away, and raised his hand to his brow. Around him, dozens of SEALs followed instinctively. No words were spoken, only the unbroken line of respect, a silent tribute to a man with no file, no number, no name, but infinite courage. That night, as the base slept under the cold desert sky, the ghost shooter moved unseen through the mountains. Somewhere beyond the ridges, he prepared for his next mission, unaware that a sea of salutes had been raised in his honor. He did not care. Recognition had never been part of his code. Action was all that mattered, and action was his alone to perform. And yet, the ritual endured. Every SEAL who heard the story, every soldier who had survived impossible odds, raised their hand in salute. It was more than a gesture. It was a promise that heroism exists beyond bureaucracy, beyond fame, beyond acknowledgement. That courage and skill can save lives even when no one is watching. That honor can live in the shadows, whispered on the wind and carried forward by those who understand. The ghost shooter had no rank, no name, no official history. But in the hearts and minds of the SEALs, he was immortal. His actions had shaped them, inspired them, and taught them that sometimes the greatest hero is the one who does not exist on paper, who answers the call alone, and who demands nothing in return. As the first rays of dawn broke over the desert horizon, the salutes continued, small and silent, echoing across bases, hills, and valleys. Each one was a thread in the tapestry of legend, connecting the ghost shooter to the men whose lives he had saved. And somewhere in the shadows, Elias Ward watched the world move on, ready to act again when necessity demanded. Every SEAL saluted, and every salute was a story, a memory, a testament to the power of one man who refused recognition, who saved lives without fanfare, and whose code of honor would endure long after the battles had ended. The ghost shooter's legend was no longer just rumor. It was principle. It was ritual. It was unbroken respect for a man who existed outside history, yet had left his mark on every soldier who had ever drawn a breath because of him. And as long as the world had wars, mountains, deserts, and men in peril, the ghost shooter would remain a silent guardian, unseen, unrecorded, yet eternally honored. The desert was quiet again, bathed in the pale gold of dawn. Helmand Province stretched endlessly, a canvas of dust, rock, and shadow, whispering stories only the wind could carry. Somewhere beyond the ridges, Elias Ward, the ghost shooter, moved silently, a figure as much myth as man. His presence had shifted the course of countless missions, saved lives that official reports would never recognize, and inspired soldiers who would forever salute a name they could not speak. Arizona felt a world away, but even there, the quiet of his repair shop held the residue of his past life. Rifles polished, tools lined with military precision, and maps meticulously stored, every detail, a reflection of the discipline that had carried him across battlefields around the globe. Yet, even amidst the mundane, the ghost's instincts remained sharp, attuned to danger, prepared for calls that no one else could answer. A new alert had arrived. Another SEAL team trapped, denied support due to political complications. The coordinates were precise, the intelligence fragmented, the odds against survival staggering. Elias did not hesitate. Preparation was ritual. Every calculation precise. Every weapon inspected. Every route studied. The ghost shooter would step into the fray once more, invisible, untraceable, unrecognized, yet indispensable. He paused for a moment, staring at a photograph tucked away in his pocket. His wife and daughter, gone years ago in a mission erased from history, smiled at him from the paper. Pain and memory flared, but they were tempered by resolve. The ghost's code had never wavered. Act without recognition, save lives without question, and vanish without trace. This mission, like every other, would honor that code. As he moved across the desert ridge toward the coordinates, Elias reflected on what he had become. A man with no rank, no name, no official record, yet a legend whispered among soldiers, a symbol of hope and precision in chaos. He had learned that heroism did not require fame, medals, or approval. Heroism required discipline, courage, and the willingness to act when no one else could. And in that, he had excelled. Night fell over the mountains as Elias took position overlooking the enemy encampment. The trapped SEALs moved cautiously, unaware of the force, silently observing them from a distant ridge. Through the scope of his barrack rifle, Elias assessed every angle, every guard, every potential threat. Time seemed to stretch, the desert holding its breath as though aware of what was about to unfold. The firefight began with sudden violence. The enemy struck first, confident, unaware of the unseen sniper poised to intervene. Bullets ricocheted, dust erupted, and chaos threatened to overwhelm the trapped team. Then came the ghost shooter's first shot, precise, surgical, delivered with calm calculation. Enemy soldiers fell one by one, unable to comprehend the source of their elimination. Throughout the night, Elias moved silently, repositioning, calculating wind and distance, adjusting his aim with uncanny precision. Every shot saved lives. Every action maintained the balance between chaos and survival. The ghost shooter was methodical, invisible, and lethal, an unseen guardian, ensuring that the impossible mission would not claim the lives it should have. By dawn, the SEAL team was extracted, unharmed, their faces reflecting disbelief, relief, and unspoken gratitude. There was no applause, no press, no official acknowledgement. Yet each man knew. Somewhere, a shadow had saved them. Somewhere, the ghost shooter had once again intervened, his presence recorded only in the lives he had spared. Back at base, small acts of homage began quietly. Cross-marked bullet casings left in memorials, hands raised in silent salutes, whispered acknowledgments among comrades. Every SEAL who had survived because of him paid tribute in ways subtle yet profound. The ghost shooter was invisible to the world, yet eternal in the hearts of those who owed their lives to him. Elias returned to Arizona as if nothing had happened. The desert had witnessed another act of precision courage, and anonymity. Back in his repair shop, he handled tools and rifles with the same meticulous care, the same discipline that had defined every mission. His life remained unrecorded, unrecognized, yet profoundly purposeful. Even as governments, media, and historians failed to note his deeds, the legend endured. Stories were shared quietly among SEAL teams and veterans. The ghost shooter who appeared when all hope was lost, whose aim never faltered, and whose presence was felt more than seen. Each retelling reinforced the standard he embodied: skill, discipline, courage, and selflessness in the purest form. The ghost's life was not glamorous. It was not celebrated. It was not safe. Yet, it was complete. The measure of his heroism was the lives saved, the impossible odds overcome, and the moral code maintained in silence. Elias had learned long ago that the world often failed to acknowledge the acts that mattered most. Recognition was irrelevant. Survival, action, and honor were enough. As years passed, whispers of the ghost shooter spread beyond Afghanistan, beyond the deserts, beyond the immediate circle of those who had survived his interventions. Soldiers in Iraq, Syria, and other conflict zones told stories of a sniper appearing from nowhere, saving lives with impossible precision. No one knew his name. No one could verify his existence. Yet every SEAL who had seen him, every soldier whose life had been spared, saluted in quiet acknowledgement. In Arizona, Elias maintained his ordinary facade. He repaired cars, rifles, and tools. He lived quietly, blending seamlessly into civilian life. Yet beneath the surface, the ghost shooter remained vigilant, monitoring intelligence, calculating risks, and preparing for the next mission. Every call for help was a summons, every impossible situation an opportunity to act. He had no other purpose, no other identity, no other audience. The ghost shooter's legacy became more than a story, it became a principle. Courage without recognition, skill without acclaim, action without expectation of reward. Every SEAL who had survived, every soldier who had heard whispers of the legend, carried that principle forward. It shaped behavior, guided decisions, and reinforced the unspoken moral code of warriors who understood that sometimes the most important hero is the one the world refuses to see. One evening, Elias stood on a ridge overlooking the desert. The wind carried whispers of the past, echoes of missions long completed, and the unspoken gratitude of countless soldiers. He held his rifle loosely, not because he needed it at that moment, but because it was part of him, part of his discipline, part of the life he could never escape. In that moment, he understood something profound. The ghost shooter would never die. He existed not in records, not in medals, not in recognition, but in memory, in principle, and in the lives he had saved. Every soldier who raised a hand in salute, every story whispered among comrades, every quiet acknowledgement in the desert or the mountains was proof that his influence was eternal. The legend of the ghost shooter was a paradox simultaneously invisible and omnipresent, unrecorded yet unforgettable. It transcended geography, politics, and history. It existed wherever courage, discipline, and selflessness were required. And Elias Ward, the man who had become a ghost, understood that this was the true measure of heroism: impact without acknowledgement, action without reward, legacy without existence. The sun rose fully over the desert, casting long shadows across the ridges. Elias Ward disappeared into one of them, moving silently, invisibly, purpose intact. Somewhere, a SEAL team would be trapped, someone would need saving, and the ghost shooter would answer the call. No name, no rank, no recognition. Only action, only discipline, only life preserved against impossible odds. And as the desert wind carried his presence into legend, every SEAL, every soldier would continue to salute. For the ghost shooter was more than a man. He was principle. He was hope. He was survival itself. And as long as there were soldiers in peril, his legend would never die. The ghost shooter had no rank, no name, yet every SEAL saluted. And through that silent honor, he became immortal. The intelligence arrived at Elias Ward's Arizona workshop in the form of a simple encrypted message. Coordinates, a time, a brief note. They are trapped. No official extraction. You know what to do. No signatures. No bureaucratic chain of command. Just the call that only he could answer. The ghost shooter, erased from the records, had been summoned once again. He packed quietly, moving with the discipline of a man whose entire life had been honed for moments like this. Rifles were cleaned, ammunition counted and meticulously arranged, maps reviewed and routes memorized. Every variable was calculated: the wind, the terrain, the position of the trapped SEAL team, and the unknown threats surrounding them. He worked alone, as always. Backup would only compromise the mission. Elias had long understood the paradox of invisibility. The less official acknowledgement, the more effective he could be. The night was black, the desert air dry and still, carrying an eerie silence that seemed almost alive. Elias moved like a shadow, leaving the town behind, heading toward the mountains, where danger and death waited for the trapped soldiers. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated. He carried not only weapons and tools, but the weight of responsibility, knowing that lives depended entirely on him. He recalled the SEAL team in distress. Their radio transmissions had been cut off, their GPS devices jammed, and official support denied due to the mission's sensitive political implications. They were surrounded by enemy forces, pinned in a narrow canyon with only their training and luck to sustain them. Without intervention, all would die. With him, there was a chance, though that chance rested entirely on his skill and judgment. Elias reached the ridge overlooking the canyon as the moonlight bathed the jagged rocks below. From this vantage, he could see the entire layout, enemy positions, obstacles, and the few areas where the SEALs could move. He was alone, invisible, and unrecorded, yet every decision would determine life or death. The ghost shooter's mind worked like a supercomputer, calculating trajectories, wind speeds, distances, angles, and timing all in real time. He fired the first shot, a precise elimination of a sentry, whose patrol had brought him dangerously close to the trapped team. The bullet found its mark silently, with almost surgical accuracy. The enemy remained unaware. Another shot, another. Each kill was deliberate, controlled, and calculated to minimize risk to the SEALs. Elias was a conductor in a deadly symphony, orchestrating the flow of battle from a perch no one would ever find. The SEALs were fighting valiantly, but were pinned down by overwhelming fire. Without the ghost shooter's intervention, casualties would have been inevitable. Elias moved stealthily along the ridge, repositioning after every engagement, never leaving a trace of his presence. Each shot protected the SEALs, creating corridors of survival, paths where they could maneuver. By dawn, the tide of battle had shifted, though the soldiers on the ground had no idea who had tipped it in their favor. Elias's actions were flawless. Every sniper round accounted for, every enemy eliminated with precision, every risk minimized. His training, honed over years in Operation Silent Echo, allowed him to operate where others could not. Every movement was invisible, yet every action ensured survival. He was the embodiment of discipline, patience, and skill. He was a ghost in the true sense, a presence whose absence was unnoticed, yet whose impact was immeasurable. When the SEALs finally broke free and retreated to safer ground, they never saw the sniper who had saved them. They only knew that bullets had struck with unerring accuracy, that enemies had fallen, and that they were alive because of some unseen force. Small, cross-marked bullet casings littered the ridges, a ghost shooter's signature, silent and untraceable. Elias watched from a distance as the team disappeared into safety. Relief washed over him, tempered by the knowledge that his work was never acknowledged. There would be no medals, no press, no recognition. The mission never happened in any official sense. Yet that didn't matter. He had done what he existed to do: save lives when no one else could, move unseen, and vanish without a trace. After the mission, he returned to his Arizona workshop as if nothing had happened. To the casual observer, Elias Ward was a quiet man, repairing rifles and cars in a small sun-baked town. Yet behind that ordinary facade was the ghost shooter, a man whose actions shaped the lives of soldiers, whose presence ensured survival, and whose legend existed only in whispers and salutes. The desert winds of Arizona carried the echoes of distant mountains, and the ghost shooter prepared silently for the next call. There would always be missions denied by bureaucracy, lives at risk where official channels could not reach, and soldiers who needed saving in the shadows. And Elias Ward, erased from records yet indelibly etched into the lives of those he saved, would always answer. His life was not one of fame or recognition. It was one of action, of discipline, and of unwavering dedication. He was a man who had no rank, no name, and no acknowledgement. Yet he remained one of the most consequential figures in the field. The ghost shooter had become legend not through medals or history books, but through the lives that endured because of him. The SEALs he saved would tell stories in hushed tones, share the legend in quiet mess halls, and raise their hands in salutes toward the mountains. They never knew him, but they understood him. And that understanding was more than any medal could provide. It was respect. It was honor. It was legacy. Elias Ward's eyes scanned the horizon from the ridge, the wind carrying the promise of another mission, another call for action. Somewhere in the world, soldiers would be in peril. And as always, the ghost shooter would appear unseen, unrecorded, and indispensable. He had no rank. He had no name. No one would ever officially acknowledge his deeds. And yet, every life he saved, every mission he completed, every salute raised in his honor was proof enough. The ghost shooter existed in the lives of soldiers, in the shadows of mountains and deserts, and in the enduring legend of what one man could achieve when he answered the call of duty in silence. The mission that never happened would live forever in memory, a testament to the power of skill, courage, and selflessness unbound by bureaucracy. The ghost shooter had once again proven that true heroism did not need recognition. It only needed resolve. Elias Ward disappeared into the desert, another ghost among the shadows, ready to answer the next call. The SEALs would survive because of him. History would never know his name, and the ghost shooter would continue to exist in legend, in honor, and in every silent salute raised by the soldiers who owed their lives to a man who did not officially exist.